Although you inherited it, the nurses say that even during the transition period, they presented same to the chief of staff and all, and so the government cannot say it was not aware. So they were hoping it would have been factored in the budget, for which reason they are demanding the implementation now.
Nana, this is a very sensitive matter.
Indeed.
Because we are dealing with issues of life and death. It is therefore not surprising that even the Mortuary Workers Association have indicated that their numbers have increased in terms of the number of dead bodies they receive daily. That is worrying. I do not think that it will be exciting news for any citizen of this republic, including that of the president and his appointees. And many of us believe, including His Excellency the President, that when it comes to public sector wages, it has not been the best for some time now. It is not just in the health sector alone. Indeed, we can decide to pretend as much as we want, but many of our public sector workers, their salaries or take-home pay can actually not take them 100 or 200 meters to their homes. Because the conditions of service in many of these public institutions can be disheartening. So the situation is known. And when it comes to even the health sector, it is even more worrying. Because I know that the health industry, the nurses constitute the anchor of our health delivery system. And so their importance cannot be underestimated or cannot be underrated. It is not lost on government, not just the NDC government. Previous governments, and so shall it be even with future governments. So their role and the sensitive nature of their role is not lost on this current government. It is also important for you to appreciate that we know that as a matter of fact that they work under terrible conditions. In most cases, even the facilities that they need to be able to carry out their work effectively, they do not have access to, largely because of their poor level of funding in many of these institutions. And they are exposed to all kinds of danger as nurses. So they deserve more. His Excellency President Mahama and his health minister and the entire government, in fact, agrees that they deserve more. It was one of our cardinal promises in the last campaign that we will work assiduously to improve the living conditions of public sector workers and to a very large extent workers of Ghana for that matter. So it is a commitment that this government still holds dear. But we need to appreciate the circumstances in which we are leading this country. The economic situation that was handed over to us should not be lost on anybody. Nana, we inherited an economic situation where we're heavily indebted. In fact, our debt stood at about 721 billion. I know miracles will agree. Quite apart from that, inflation was troubling. What it simply meant is that even the already meager salaries our public sector workers are entitled to, was the impact of these salaries were further dwindled. It was dwindled largely because of inflation. So if you could buy 5 tubers of yam with your salary, because of the high levels of inflation, you probably would have ended buying only 2. So the value of their salaries was washed down, down the drain. So we know that was the kind of economic situation we inherited. Even in the heat of that, we also inherited an unforgivable debt in the energy sector. And you know the essence of the energy sector to even the economic sustainability of our country. And this government quickly needed to rush in to resolve many of these challenges. Now, cocoa industry. Our cocoa that is supposed to rake in foreign revenue, the industry was simply run down in the last 8 years. Now, cocoa port is heavily indebted. Our energy sector is heavily indebted. You naturally would understand that these were the economic conditions under which President Mahama assumed the reins of government.
Right.
And even just before that, we had gotten to a stage where this government, because of our economic situation, could not meet its financial obligations. That led to us being locked out of the capital markets because we had borrowed so much and failed to generate more revenue internally. So even our international creditors were unwilling to open the markets to us for us to borrow, to finance our obligations internally. This had never happened until 2022 thereabout.
Right.
Since 92, we've not had this kind of experience. We had to subject many of our workers to the domestic debt exchange program, largely because our economy was in challenges. When we came into power, the World Bank, in its report 2025, somewhere January, indicated that this government needed to be careful because if you look at the wage bill alone, it was clearly unsustainable. And so, one way of dealing with your inflation and ensuring prudence was simply for us to take a holistic view of our wage bill. The IMF, in our engagement with the extended credit facility that was handed over to us, also raised a similar concern with how unsustainable our wage bill has become in the last 8 years. And I must be magnanimous here to say that I think that we didn't start having the wage bill problems under Nanado. Indeed, it preceded to a very large extent the Nanado regime. But some way, somehow, it became so intense under the last 8 years. So this is the economic situation in which we find ourselves.
Right.
Now, as a government, when we came, we started working on the budget. And so by January, the draft budget was done, presented to Parliament, seeking for an opportune time for the finance minister to go and present it to the whole country. At the time we were engaged in the negotiations to fashion out the budget of the year, the Ghana Registered Nurses and Midwives Association and their other colleagues were still in court over this agreement that they had reached in May last year with the previous administration.
Right.
So at that material moment, we did not anticipate a situation where that matter would be resolved and we would have to take on that additional financial burden. In any case, even if it was anticipated, because of the economic situation that we found ourselves, remember that His Excellency President Mahama indicated that it was the time for the nation to tighten its belt because we're going to embark on an austerity measure so that we could clean up the system and make the country more sustainable. These were the objectives. It simply meant that we're going to cut down expenditure, but government had to lead the way. That was what resulted in the reduction of the number of ministers. That is what has resulted in the reduction of the employees at the presidency, because we knew that for the Ghanaian people to be willing to make sacrifices, the government itself must indicate a commitment to ensuring that they themselves are ready to make such sacrifices. I'll get there, please. So this is the situation in which we find ourselves. We do not want a situation where we would, for political reasons, say that, look, we are going to add your demands this year. What it simply would mean is that even us as a government, we are not committed to the very blueprint we presented to government or to Parliament in our quest to reduce expenditure for this year in particular. Because we know that if we're able to do the necessary cleanup, we would have at least an appreciable economic space by next year to be able to operate within. And so many of these financial obligations will be met. Government has not said that they will not meet these financial obligations. What we are only seeking is that instead of making the implementation year 2025 and the expiry of same 2025, because by the close of this year, it would have expired, or 2026 rather. Government is simply saying that, look, let us make the implementation year next year, so that at least we would have an opportunity to contain the financial requirements of that obligation, which is in excess of 2 billion Ghana cedis. And you can imagine that is about more than 10% of the entire budgetary allocation to the health services for this year alone. We simply do not have the financial space to be able to do that. Secondly, if we proceed in opening the budget to such unexpected expenditures, we would have been breaching our conditionalities with the IMF, which these people signed. And it will threaten even the next tranche of allocation. Undoubtedly, its implications on the economy would not be lost on all of us. So this is the difficult situation in which His Excellency President Mahama and the government finds itself.
Right.
It is not as if we are saying we will not honor these agreements. We will honor these agreements, but we are simply seeking for the space to be able to mop out liquidity, like we are doing now with Gold Board, trying to bring in more revenue, like we are doing in terms of our exchange rate, because the way we are handling the exchange rate, it simply means that your 1,000 Ghana cedis that couldn't buy 5 tubers of yam can now at least buy that 5 tubers of yam. So the value of money, your salary, has increased in a way. But as a government, we know that it is our responsibility to ensure that it becomes better. So this is the kind of economic situation we find ourselves. And our nurses must understand that in as much as we want to honor these obligations and improve their lives, it is practically impossible this year. So they must, for the sake of the Ghanaian people, privilege the lives of many of our people who are dying over this legitimate demand of theirs. Because we are not saying we will not honor it. We are simply asking for them to move the implementation year from this year to 2026. And like Senior indicated, you see, it is not as if when we move into next year, this current agreement with government would have been due to expire somewhere 2026. So instead of it expiring in 2026, if implemented, we are simply saying that let's start the implementation in 2026. So at least the expiry date can be moved to 2028. We extended. That is all what we are demanding.
Very well.
So they need to understand where we are coming from as a government. And we understand that they are major partners when it comes to health delivery in this country. And His Excellency President Mahama will not take that for granted. And I know my brother agrees. That, now let me land, please. I know my brother agrees that irrespective of our differences as political parties, when it comes to the health delivery architecture, there is the need for us to privilege the lives of the ordinary Ghanaian. And so I won't be surprised, even he himself calls on the nurses to go back to work, largely because of the lives that are under threat.
Very well.